I've dedicated a whole segment and a whole chapter to communication strategy because this is so important on so many levels. One level we've already talked about a little bit, which is marketing and promotion. But another level is creating partnerships and collaborations, because one of the main things that keep coming up in all the social entrepreneurs I interviewed around the world is you can't do it alone. And also, we just finished talking about organizational health. Communication strategy doesn't just mean external, it also means internal. Communicating is what's going to effectively and efficiently is what's going to make you a streamlined, lead, mean, social challenge tackling machine. So let's talk about what a communication strategy looks like and how you can organize it so that it's not intimidating. You've already been communicating since the start, and the number one communication skill is listening. And that's the first thing that you did when you went out there to co-create with the community. So you've got this. Now, the different components of communication strategy, we start with who and why. Everything you do needs to be goal-oriented. And the goal is different for each stakeholder. So for example, when you're talking about internal communications, the goal is going to differ depending on which role you want people to play and why you're communicating with them. And you need to build different channels of communication within your organization. External stakeholders, you're going to be communicating with them for different reasons, like reporting, for example, or advocacy. And then obviously there's your customers in terms of thinking about what actions you're asking them to take and how you're going to nudge them forward to take the action and what messaging. And of course, there's the partners and advocates in terms of when you're communicating externally and you're trying to influence policy or you're trying to partner with organizations, that's going to look different too. So you're going to have, your strategy is basically going to be comprised of starting with all the different actions that you need people to take and all the different types of stakeholders you're communicating with and why. What is the goal behind communicating with them? Then you'll move on to the what. The what is the messaging. What exactly are you trying to get across? And so there's a lot of tools to help you craft your messages, especially those for your external stakeholders like potential customers, or the audience for your advocacy. And on page 239, I've included a couple of different tools that I picked up from leading organizations around the world, including enterprising nonprofits in Canada and others. I really love the stakeholder ladder because the stakeholder ladder drives home the message that it's not about one-stop communication. It's about people climbing the ladder of engagement, starting with they don't know anything about you, right? So informing them, they might be suspicious at first, gaining their interest so that they'll become prospective, fill in the blank, prospective customer, prospective advocate, prospective supporter, prospective funder. And then you really want to get them engaged with your product or service and testing it and finding out what effect it has on them and how much they believe in it. And then you really get that advocate and that evangelist who not only is going to use your product or service for them, but are really going to own this mission and spread it forward. And so you have to craft different messaging for different stakeholders at different stages along this ladder. And so the multi-dimensional messaging matrix helps you do that, thinking about your end users, your internal team, existing stakeholders, and prospective stakeholders. Now, once we figured out who, why, and what, we have to figure out how, and that leads to the different channels of communication available to us. So you guys know about all the obvious channels like social media. Well, you have to be really careful with social media. It can go either way. It needs to be done by people who are specialized in this. Not anyone can get positive responses, and you need to know how to handle negative responses because just like something going viral can help you, it can also harm you. There's also different forms of multimedia, like whether you're posting something on social media or your website or other, you have to think about, is it going to be the written word? Is it going to be a video? Is it going to be audio? How will people engage with each nugget of information that you need to get across to them? I think that publications are really helpful because you've done so much research and work, and you're really at the cutting edge in building human knowledge on this topic. And so you want to present yourself and position yourself as a thought leader. And so partnering with research institutions like universities can help you publish peer-reviewed academic literature and establish that you're generating this new data. Of course, that reaches a limited audience, so that and you then need to take your findings and also present them in more outward-facing platforms like blogs and websites. I personally love the Stanford Social Innovation Review, so I make sure that every time I publish in a peer-reviewed academic journal, I then add my own perspective and republish as an op-ed in Stanford Social Innovation Review or a similar platform. You also might want to have a mailing list, and you need to be careful about who you email and when. It does need to be on a regular basis so that people don't forget about you, but you don't want them to get annoyed with you and just like roll their eyes every time they see your name or your organization in your inbox. And you also need to make sure that you get their permission to add you to a mailing list, by the way. There's also, using all these different channels, you can do surveys and feedback forms, like really interactive things, whether internally with your team or externally with your customers and advocates. And I want to end with what I think is the most important, which is FaceTime. And I don't mean FaceTime on your iPhone. I mean sitting with people one-on-one. That's how it all started when you got out there and co-created with the community. That's how you're going to build partners and customers and advocates. And this can look like a lot of different things. So one of my favorite social entrepreneurs is Doug Rao, and he comes and speaks in my class every year. And he used to be the president of Trader Joe's. And he realized there was so much food waste and wasted food that was not being used because supermarkets procure such large volumes and then they throw things away even when they're perfectly good. So he came up with a business model and launched the Daily Table, which is a social enterprise here in Massachusetts, where he sells these perfectly good products at a reduced price. He obviously had to iterate his business model a lot, so he now procures from wholesalers very early in the morning, right after they sell to grocery stores, and he takes for very low price fresh produce and then resells it in Dorchester and other locations. And he told me that a sample speaks a million words, just like, you know, actions speak louder than words and a picture speaks 1,000 words. Experiencing the product or service, sampling it, really wins people over. So whatever you're doing, you want people to immerse themselves in it, whether it's food and you can sample it, whether it's a field immersion or something, but you really want people to live it. And I think that that really speaks to something that you should keep in mind when you're communicating, which is that you want to evoke emotion in people. You want to evoke a personal reaction. And so when you're crafting your messages, you want to be thoughtful, you want to keep it personal, keep it simple, and evoke emotion. And don't forget that different channels and messages are needed in different settings. So if you're working in a rural setting or in a more conservative society versus an urban or more modern or Western society, you're going to have to communicate differently. And at different stages of your venture, you're going to need people with different communication skills. So it's a lot to think about, but if you use this framework, and if you use some of the additional tools that I've listed at the end of the chapter in box 12.1 and 12.2 on page 249, I think you'll really get the hang of it.